My name is Allison Parker. I'm 27, and I was still in my black funeral dress when Jessica ordered me to stay for a 16-hour shift. My dad's body wasn't even cold in the ground. Through my tears, I sorted files while she watched with satisfaction. Then I found it, the forgotten Blackwell contract worth $2 million on her desk. After years of her cruelty, karma had finally delivered the perfect revenge opportunity. Before I continue my story, I'm curious where you're watching from today. My dad always said the world feels smaller when we connect through shared experiences. If this resonates with you already, please hit that like button. It would have made my dad proud to know his daughter's story is bringing people together. When he taught me to stand up for myself, I never imagined it would lead to this workplace showdown. Subscribe to follow my journey of grief, betrayal, and ultimately, justice served in the most unexpected way. My father, Thomas Parker, was my rock, my mentor, and my biggest cheerleader. We had the kind of bond that many daughters dream of having with their fathers. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, helped me with my science projects, and later guided me through career decisions with wisdom that came from his 30 years in corporate marketing. Dad had this infectious laugh that could fill a room and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His favorite saying was, "Always do right by others, even when they don't do right by you." I tried to live by those words, even when it felt impossible. 8 months before that fateful day at the office, Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis came suddenly after weeks of him dismissing stomach pain as just getting older. Mom called me at work that day, her voice breaking as she relayed the doctor's grim timeline. 6 months, maybe less. I remember sliding down the wall of the supply closet where I'd taken the call, my legs giving out beneath me. Our family had always been relatively close, though like most families, we had our complications. My mother Eleanor was the practical one, the stabilizing force who kept everything running when emotions threatened to derail us. She managed Dad's medical appointments, insurance paperwork, and somehow still maintained her part-time job teaching piano to neighborhood kids. My younger brother Nathan, who was 24 and just starting his career as an engineer, flew home from Chicago every other weekend during Dad's illness. He was quiet in his grief, channeling his emotions into practical help, fixing things around the house, driving Dad to treatments, researching experimental options. Then there was my older sister Melanie. At 32, she was an investment banker in Boston, always too busy, always with a reason why she couldn't make it home more often. Melanie and Dad had a complicated relationship. She'd always been driven to succeed, to prove herself, and somewhere along the way, their similar personalities had created friction rather than connection. During Dad's illness, she called regularly but visited rarely. When she did come home, the tension was palpable. I resented her for not being there more, for missing precious moments that none of us would ever get back. She works in a demanding field. Mom would defend her. Not everyone can take time off as easily as you can. That was another thing. My family never fully understood what I dealt with at Meridian Solutions. They saw a good salary, a prestigious company name, and assumed I had it made. They didn't see the daily battlefield I navigated under Jessica Harrison's management. I'd joined Meridian Solutions 4 years earlier, fresh out of college, with a marketing degree and big dreams. The company was known for its innovative digital marketing strategies and impressive client list. Landing the job felt like winning the lottery, a feeling that lasted approximately 2 weeks before I met Jessica. Jessica Harrison was 42, impeccably dressed, and had a reputation for delivering results that made the executive team overlook her methods. In public settings, client meetings, company gatherings, she was charming, articulate, and seemingly supportive of her team. But behind closed doors, she was a nightmare. "You're lucky to be here," she told me during our first one-on-one meeting. "There were 100 more qualified candidates than you. Don't make me regret taking a chance." I hadn't understood then that this was her standard introduction to new team members, establishing dominance, creating insecurity, setting the stage for the psychological warfare to come. I just nodded, determined to prove myself worthy of the opportunity. Over the next 4 years, I watched Jessica systematically break down confident professionals, take credit for others' work, and create an environment of fear and competition. Those who challenged her mysteriously found themselves sidelined from important projects or subjected to public criticism that chipped away at their professional reputation. One by one, talented colleagues either quit or were forced out, replaced by new hires who hadn't yet learned what they were in for. Through it all, I persevered. I needed the job, especially after Dad got sick and medical bills started piling up. Insurance covered most expenses, but the experimental treatments we pursued, the special dietary supplements, the comfortable recliner we bought so Dad could sleep downstairs when stairs became too difficult, these things added up quickly. My parents had some savings, but it wasn't enough. Nathan contributed what he could from his entry-level salary. Melanie sent money, substantial amounts, but rarely herself. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," Dad said during one of our late-night talks, when pain kept him awake and I sat beside his bed. "You've got grit. Don't let that woman steal your spirit." I promised him I wouldn't, but some days it felt like Jessica was winning that battle. The day Dad died was one of those days. Meridian Solutions presented itself as a forward-thinking marketing firm with an emphasis on work-life balance, innovation, and employee satisfaction. The website featured smiling staff members collaborating in bright, open workspaces. The reality couldn't have been more different, at least in the client acquisition department where Jessica reigned. The competitive atmosphere was cultivated deliberately, with Jessica pitting team members against each other for limited resources, recognition, and the few promotions that came available. Monthly performance metrics were publicly displayed, creating a fishbowl effect where everyone's successes and failures were visible to all. Jessica claimed this promoted healthy competition, but there was nothing healthy about the anxiety it generated. Jessica's rise to power had been swift and calculated. She'd started at Meridian just 7 years earlier, but quickly aligned herself with the right executives, particularly CEO Richard Warren. Their connection predated Meridian. They'd attended the same business school, though Richard had been 2 years ahead of her. This relationship gave Jessica an unspoken protection that made her virtually untouchable. Her management style was a masterclass in manipulation. She would lavish praise on team members in one meeting, then criticize the same work to others behind their backs. She maintained an inner circle of 3 or 4 employees who received preferential treatment, better assignments, flexible schedules, invitations to client dinners, while the rest of us scrambled for scraps of opportunity. The composition of this favored group shifted periodically, keeping everyone insecure about their standing. Never trust Jessica's smile, warned Taylor Wright, a fellow account executive who had been at Meridian for 6 years. The bigger the smile, the sharper the knife. I had seen enough evidence to know Taylor wasn't exaggerating. There was Diane from Creative Services, who questioned Jessica's approach to a major campaign during a team meeting. The next week, Diane was assigned to the smallest, least significant accounts, effectively sidelining her career. 6 months later, she was let go during a minor restructuring that somehow only affected employees who had crossed Jessica. Then there was Marcus, a brilliant strategist who had secured a major client Jessica had been pursuing unsuccessfully for months. Rather than celebrate the win, Jessica claimed Marcus had violated protocol by not involving her in final negotiations. He was placed on probation and eventually left for a competitor, his confidence shattered. Most of us who remained developed coping mechanisms. We documented everything in emails, built alliances with colleagues in other departments, and tried to make ourselves invaluable to key clients. But complaining to human resources was futile. The HR director, Patricia Novak, was professionally friendly with Jessica and seemed to share her view that workplace stress was simply the cost of success in a competitive industry. "We're not running a daycare," I overheard Patricia tell a tearful intern who had reported Jessica's bullying. "If you can't handle feedback, perhaps corporate marketing isn't for you." Despite this toxic environment, I was determined to succeed. I arrived early, stayed late, and produced work that even Jessica couldn't criticize openly. I built strong relationships with clients who specifically requested me for their projects. This created a shield of sorts, Jessica couldn't target me too obviously without risking client satisfaction, which was the one metric executives valued above all else. My biggest win had been securing the Henderson account, a regional retail chain looking to expand nationally. Jessica had been courting their marketing director for months with elaborate presentations and expensive lunches. What ultimately won them over was my straightforward analysis of their current marketing weaknesses and a practical roadmap for improvement. The client specifically requested that I lead their account, a victory that earned me temporary protection but permanent resentment from Jessica. "Congratulations," she said when the contract was signed, her smile tight. "Just remember, the higher you climb, the farther you fall. Don't get comfortable." The Henderson success increased Jessica's scrutiny of my work. She began requiring daily updates, questioning my decisions in front of clients, and assigning me additional responsibilities without removing existing ones. It was a calculated effort to make me fail through overwork and impossible standards. When Dad's condition worsened, this pressure became nearly unbearable. Jessica seemed to view my family crisis as an opportunity to prove her point that I couldn't handle the demands of the job. Each request for time off to take Dad to appointments was met with sighs and reminders of impending deadlines. Each day I spent at the hospital resulted in a pile of urgent tasks upon my return. "Family emergencies don't mean client deadlines change," she reminded me constantly. "The rest of the team shouldn't have to compensate for your personal situation." The team she referred to consisted largely of recent hires who were still trying to prove themselves and were afraid to appear sympathetic to someone who had fallen from favor. Even Taylor, who remained friendly, kept a professional distance during office hours, aware that being seen as my ally could make her Jessica's next target. As Dad's condition deteriorated, so did my standing at Meridian. Projects I had nurtured were reassigned to others. Client meetings were scheduled during times I had clearly marked as unavailable for medical appointments. My performance review, previously stellar, suddenly contained concerns about my commitment and reliability. Throughout this campaign of professional isolation, Jessica maintained plausible deniability. She expressed appropriate sympathy when others were present, sent a standard company flower arrangement when Dad entered hospice care, and publicly offered flexibility that never materialized in practice. "Of course, family comes first," she told me in front of our team. "We're all here to support you during this difficult time." Hours later, in a private email, the Henderson presentation deadline remains unchanged. "Your personal circumstances don't alter client expectations." I was being pushed to breaking point, and Jessica knew it. What she didn't know was that I was my father's daughter, and he hadn't raised me to break easily. Dad's cancer journey began with what he dismissed as indigestion. "Too much of your mother's spicy chili," he joked, popping antacids like candy. By the time severe pain drove him to the doctor, the cancer had already spread beyond the pancreas to his liver. The oncologist used words like aggressive and limited options in that sterile consultation room while Mom gripped my hand so tightly her wedding ring cut into my palm. The initial treatment plan was brutal but straightforward. Intensive chemotherapy to try to shrink the tumors, followed by potential surgical options if the response was good. Dad approached it with characteristic optimism. "I've got too much living left to do," he insisted, creating a bucket list that included teaching Nathan to fly fish and seeing me put that horrible boss in her place someday. The first 3 months following diagnosis were a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and learning more medical terminology than I ever wanted to know. I took as much time off as I dared, using vacation days and the limited personal days Meridian provided. Jessica's response was predictable. "Everyone has family issues, Allison," she said during a particularly difficult week when Dad had been hospitalized for an infection. "I need to know if you can handle this job or if we should redistribute your accounts temporarily." The threat was clear. Temporarily at Meridian often became permanently. I assured her I could manage, which meant working from hospital waiting rooms, answering emails at 3 in the morning, and preparing presentations while Dad slept in his hospital bed beside me. Month 4 brought a glimmer of hope. The tumors had shrunk enough that surgery became an option. The procedure was risky but offered the possibility of extending Dad's prognosis from months to potentially years. We celebrated with a small family dinner the night before surgery, even Melanie flying in for the occasion. To second chances, Dad toasted, raising his glass of sparkling cider since alcohol was forbidden. The surgery lasted 11 hours. When the surgeon finally appeared in the waiting room, his expression told us everything before he spoke a word. They had found more extensive spread than imaging had shown. They had removed what they could, but it wasn't enough. Recovery would be difficult, and the remaining cancer would continue to grow. I needed a week off to help Mom get Dad settled at home, with new care requirements. Jessica's response was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She approved the time off but assigned me the Westfield proposal, our biggest potential new client of the quarter, due the day I returned. The team will cover your regular duties, but we can't ask someone else to take on Westfield with such short notice, she explained in an email copy to the entire department. I'm sure you'll find time to work on it between your other responsibilities. I spent nights on the Westfield proposal while Dad slept fitfully down the hall. I researched competitors while helping Mom change bedsheets after Dad became violently ill from his medications. I practiced my presentation in whispers while sitting beside his bed during bad nights when pain kept him awake. When I delivered a flawless presentation upon my return, securing the Westfield account against significant competition, Jessica's only comment was, "The graphics could have been more innovative." Let's remember that for next time. As Dad moved into month 6, exceeding the initial prognosis, but declining steadily, the balance between work and family became increasingly impossible. I requested a reduced schedule, 30 hours instead of 50+, with proportional pay reduction. Jessica denied it, claiming client relationships would suffer. I asked about short-term family leave. She reminded me that I hadn't been at the company long enough to qualify for the full benefit, conveniently ignoring that I qualified for partial coverage. Dad noticed the toll it was taking. During a lucid afternoon when pain medication had provided rare clarity, he confronted me. "You look exhausted, Alley Cat," he said, using my childhood nickname. "Is that woman still making your life hell?" I tried to deflect, not wanting him to worry, but Dad had always been able to see through my brave faces. "Listen to me," he said, his once strong hand now frail as it gripped mine. "There are two kinds of people in this world, those who build others up and those who tear them down to feel bigger. Your Jessica is the second kind." "She's not worth quitting over, Dad," I said. "Not with all the medical bills." He shook his head. "I'm not saying quit. I'm saying stop giving her power over your spirit. People like that, they can take your job, your time, even your energy. But they only take your dignity if you hand it over." It was one of our last real conversations. The following week, he developed pneumonia, a common complication for cancer patients with weakened immune systems. His body, already fighting on too many fronts, couldn't mount another defense. I called Jessica on a Tuesday morning, my voice breaking as I explained that hospice had given Dad hours, maybe days. "I need to be with my family," I said. "I'm sorry about the Miller meeting, but Taylor has all the information. The Miller account specifically requested you," Jessica interrupted. "They're worth 6 figures annually, Allison. Surely you can come in for 3 hours. Your father won't know the difference." Those words burned something inside me. "My father's dying," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I will not be coming in today, tomorrow, or likely the rest of the week. I'll update you when I have more information." I hung up before she could respond, something I'd never done before. Dad died that night at 11:37 p.m., with Mom, Nathan, and me holding his hands. Melanie arrived 30 minutes too late, a delay she would blame on airline schedules, but that added another layer to her guilt and our complicated relationship. The next morning, I sent a brief email to Jessica and HR, informing them of Dad's passing and requesting the company's standard 3 days of bereavement leave. Jessica's reply came within minutes, expressing appropriate condolences and confirming the leave. Patricia from HR followed up with official paperwork and the company's standard sympathy message. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, allowing out-of-town relatives to travel and giving the funeral home time for preparations. I spent those days in a fog, helping mom with arrangements, accepting casseroles from neighbors, and trying to process the reality that dad was gone. Friday night, as relatives gathered at our family home for a small dinner before the next day's service, my phone pinged with a text from Jessica. "I know tomorrow is difficult, but we have an emergency with the Blackwell proposal." Their CFO moved the deadline to Monday instead of Wednesday. "I need you to come in after the service to finalize the numbers. Everyone else is unavailable. It shouldn't take more than a few hours." I stared at the message, unable to comprehend the audacity. The Blackwell contract, a potential $2 million deal, had been in development for months. The deadline had always been Wednesday. There was no emergency that couldn't be handled by Jessica herself or waited until Monday. But in my grief-stricken state, with financial worries about mom's future weighing heavily, I couldn't summon the strength to fight. I texted back a simple, "Okay," and turned my phone off for the remainder of the evening, trying to be present with my family while dread built in my stomach about what awaited me after tomorrow's funeral. Saturday morning dawned with appropriate gloom, overcast skies, and a light drizzle that seemed to mirror our collective mood. I helped mom with her makeup, applying foundation over skin made paler by sleepless nights. Nathan straightened his tie in silence, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. Melanie arrived at the house already dressed in an expensive black suit, her professional armor intact despite the redness around her eyes. The West Side Chapel was filled beyond capacity. Dad had been beloved in the community, a Little League coach, a volunteer at the food bank, and a friend who never hesitated to help with home repairs or lend his truck for moving day. Flower arrangements lined the walls, their sweet scent almost, but not quite masking the somber smell of wood polish and hushed grief. The service itself passed in a blur. The pastor spoke about Dad's generosity and faith. 3 of his oldest friends shared memories that made us laugh through tears. Nathan read a poem that had been one of Dad's favorites. When it was my turn to deliver the eulogy, I somehow found strength in remembering Dad's words about dignity. "My father believed that how we treat others reveals our true character," I said, scanning the tear-streaked faces before me. "He showed us that kindness isn't weakness, that integrity matters more than success, and that family is life's greatest treasure." The only surprise came during the open sharing time, when Melanie unexpectedly approached the podium. My sister, who carefully managed her public image and emotional displays, was visibly struggling to maintain composure. "I thought I had time," she began, her voice catching. "I thought career achievements would make my father proud, that success would justify my absences. I was wrong." She looked directly at Mom, then at me. "Dad knew what I'm only now learning, that no promotion, no bonus is worth missing the moments that matter with the people who matter." Her unexpected vulnerability cracked something in me. Perhaps there was more depth to my sister than I had acknowledged, more complexity to her choices and her pain. At the graveside service, I stood between Mom and Nathan, Melanie on Mom's other side. As they lowered Dad's casket, Mom squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but the physical pain was almost welcome, something tangible to focus on besides the hole opening inside my chest. The reception afterward was held at our family home, filled with people sharing stories about Dad over sandwiches and coffee. I was in the kitchen, helping Aunt Linda arrange another tray of food, when my phone vibrated in my pocket. "Jessica, again. The Blackwell situation is more urgent than I thought. Can you come in now instead of later? We need at least 16 hours to recreate the financial projections." 16 hours. Not the few hours mentioned last night. And recreate. What had happened to the original projections? I stepped into the bathroom to call her. "Jessica, I'm at my father's funeral reception. What happened to the original Blackwell projections?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Server issue," she said dismissively. "The point is, they're gone, the meeting is Monday morning, and someone needs to rebuild them. Everyone else is unavailable." "Everyone?" I questioned. "Taylor? Marcus? You?" "Taylor's on vacation. Marcus has a family event he can't miss, and I have the charity gala tonight that's been planned for months. I can't rebuild the projections myself because I don't have your familiarity with the underlying data." Her voice hardened. This is a $2 million contract, Allison. Are you really going to jeopardize it because you're feeling emotional? What would your father think about that kind of professional irresponsibility? The manipulation was obvious, but effective. What would Dad think? He'd raised me to honor my commitments, to be reliable, to do the right thing even when it was difficult. But he'd also told me not to surrender my dignity. I'll be there in an hour, I finally said, hating myself for giving in but seeing no alternative. But Jessica, I want this noted in my file that I came in on bereavement leave during a family emergency. Of course, she replied smoothly. Your dedication will be recognized. I returned to the reception, pulled Mom aside, and explained the situation as diplomatically as possible. Her face fell, but she nodded with resignation. Your father would understand. Responsibility was everything to him. I'm so sorry, I whispered, hugging her tightly. Nathan was less accepting. That's complete bullshit, Ally. They can't make you work today of all days. They're not making me, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's just a really important client. Surprisingly, it was Melanie who offered the most supportive response. I'll stay with Mom tonight, she said. Take my car, it has better headlights if you're driving home late. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, want me to come by later with food? 16 hours is a long time without breaks. Touched by her offer, I nodded. That would be great, actually. Thank you. I didn't have time to change out of my funeral clothes before heading to the office. The black dress and low heels that had carried me through Dad's service would now carry me through this professional ordeal. Fitting somehow. The Meridian Solutions building was eerily quiet when I arrived, most employees enjoying their Saturday with family and friends. I swiped my key card, the empty lobby echoing with my footsteps as I made my way to the elevator. Our department floor was dark except for the light spilling from Jessica's corner office. She glanced up when I entered, taking in my funeral attire with a flicker of something. Discomfort? Satisfaction? Before her professional mask settled back in place. The Blackwell files are on your desk. I've left notes about what needs to be recreated. I'll be leaving for the gala in 30 minutes, but I'll check in later tonight. I nodded mutely and went to my desk, finding a stack of folders and a yellow legal pad with Jessica's handwriting outlining the tasks ahead. As I began sorting through the materials, trying to focus through the fog of grief, Jessica appeared beside me. I really appreciate this, Allison. The executive team will hear about your dedication. She was dressed in an evening gown now, clearly ready for her charity event. I'll be back around midnight to check your progress. The promised 30 minutes stretched to 45 as Jessica made phone calls and finished her makeup. When she finally left, the silence of the empty office pressed in around me. I sat in my funeral dress, staring at spreadsheets and market analyses while memories of Dad kept breaking through my concentration. Dad teaching me to drive in an empty parking lot, patiently talking me through my anxiety. Dad cheering embarrassingly loud at my college graduation. Dad in his hospital bed, telling me not to let Jessica steal my spirit. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed between grief and responsibility, before I forced myself to start working. The financial projections were complex, requiring data from multiple sources and careful analysis to ensure accuracy. Under normal circumstances, this would be challenging but manageable. Today, each number seemed to swim before my eyes, requiring triple-checking for mistakes. Hours passed. The office grew darker as evening settled in. I switched on my desk lamp, creating a small pool of light in the otherwise dark space. At some point, my phone pinged with a text from Melanie. Coming by with food in 20. Need anything specific? Her arrival was a welcome interruption. She appeared in the doorway balancing a thermal bag and 2 coffees, looking incongruous in her expensive funeral suit against the utilitarian office backdrop. This place is creepy when it's empty, she commented, setting the food on my desk. How's it going? I gestured at the scattered papers and my laptop screen displaying complex financial models. Slowly. I keep losing focus. Melanie pulled up a chair beside me, opened the thermal bag to reveal containers of pasta from Dad's favorite Italian restaurant, and asked, What are we working on exactly? The "we" surprised me. Melanie had never shown interest in my work before, but her presence and the practical offer of help penetrated my exhaustion. I found myself explaining the Blackwell project, the missing projections, and the impossible deadline. "This is suspicious," Melanie said after hearing the full story. "Server issues don't usually target specific files, and backups exist for exactly this reason. Plus, 16 hours to recreate something that probably took weeks originally." I hadn't had the energy to question Jessica's explanation, but Melanie's skepticism awakened my own doubts. "You think she deleted them deliberately?" Melanie's expression hardened. "I think your boss saw an opportunity to make you suffer or fail, or both. Dad would call that bullying, plain and simple." Hearing Dad invoked stirred something in me. I straightened in my chair and reached for the container of pasta. "Well, I'm not going to fail. Help me understand these market penetration estimates." For the next 3 hours, Melanie stayed, using her financial expertise to help me rebuild complex models and verify assumptions. Her analytical mind caught errors I was too exhausted to notice, and her presence kept the grief at bay, if only temporarily. "I should have known you were dealing with this kind of toxic environment," she said as she prepared to leave around 11. "I was so caught up in my own career drama." "We've all been caught up in our own worlds," I admitted. "But you're here now." After she left, promising to check on Mom and return in the morning with breakfast, I continued working through the night. Jessica returned from her gala around midnight as promised, seeming surprised to find me still diligently working. "How's it coming along?" she asked, the slight slur in her words suggesting she'd enjoyed the open bar at her event. "I've rebuilt the core financial models and updated the market analysis," I reported, professional despite my exhaustion. "I should finish the executive summary and presentation by noon tomorrow." Jessica frowned. "The team arrives at 8 tomorrow for final review. It needs to be done by then." Another shifting deadline, another impossible expectation. I nodded mechanically, too tired to argue. "I need to grab some files from my office for review at home," she said, moving toward her corner office. "Keep up the good work." As Jessica disappeared into her office, I rose to stretch my legs and get water, my funeral heels long since discarded under my desk. Walking past the office kitchen, something caught my eye on the conference room table, a familiar blue folder with the Blackwell logo. Curious, I entered the conference room and opened the folder. Inside was a complete copy of the supposedly lost financial projections, presentation slides, and executive summary, all with my name listed as preparer, but with subtle changes that introduced errors into the calculations. My exhausted brain took several moments to process what I was seeing. These weren't accidentally deleted files. This was deliberate sabotage. Jessica had copied my work, introduced errors that would be discovered during the client presentation, and set me up to take the fall for a potential $2 million failure. The 16-hour shift wasn't about recreating lost work. It was about keeping me occupied while she executed her plan. I quickly took photos of the doctored documents with my phone, then returned them exactly as I'd found them. Back at my desk, I compared the sabotaged versions with what I was recreating. The differences were subtle but significant. Growth projections inflated just enough to seem aspirational rather than fraudulent, cost estimates lowered just enough to make the ROI more attractive. As I contemplated this discovery, Jessica emerged from her office carrying a leather portfolio. "I'm heading out. I expect the completed work in my inbox by 7 a.m. for review before the team arrives." "Of course," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite the anger and betrayal burning inside me. "Have a good night, Jessica." After she left, I sat motionless, staring at the evidence of her betrayal on my screen. Dad's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "People show you who they are. Believe them the first time." Jessica had shown me exactly who she was, someone willing to sabotage a colleague's career while they were literally at their father's funeral. The question now was, who was I going to be in response? I think about that moment often, sitting in my funeral dress in an empty office at 1 a.m, grief and exhaustion clouding my thoughts, facing a moral crossroads. Would Dad want me to fight back or rise above? Would he tell me to expose Jessica's scheme or protect my job by staying silent? I wish I could tell you I knew immediately what to do, but the truth is I spent hours wrestling with my options while continuing to work on the legitimate projections. It wasn't until I went to Jessica's office looking for additional reference materials that I found it, the final piece of the puzzle that would change everything. There on her desk, partially hidden under meeting agendas and coffee receipts, was the original Blackwell contract. Not a copy, but the signed original that should have been processed weeks ago to initialize the project. The signature date was nearly a month old, and attached post-it notes indicated Jessica had been sitting on it deliberately, creating the artificial deadline crisis. This wasn't just about sabotaging me anymore. This was about covering up her own serious negligence by creating a distraction. And suddenly, I knew exactly what Dad would want me to do. I'm sure you're wondering what happened next, how this all played out after my shocking discovery. Sometimes the moments that test us the most also reveal our true strength. Have you ever had a moment where someone's cruelty accidentally gave you the very tools to stand up to them? Share your thoughts in the comments about whether you'd have confronted Jessica immediately or planned a strategic response. While you think about that, let me continue with what happened after I found that forgotten contract. The Blackwell contract lay before me, its implications slowly crystallizing in my exhausted mind. I carefully examined every page, taking photos with my phone for documentation. The contract terms were standard for our industry, a 12-month engagement with quarterly performance reviews, confidentiality clauses, and detailed deliverables. What wasn't standard was the processing timeline. According to the attached email printouts, Jessica had received the signed contract 26 days ago. Company policy required all contracts to be processed within 3 business days of receipt. The contract should have been registered in our system, copies distributed to relevant departments, and work officially commenced weeks ago. Instead, Jessica had buried it under paperwork on her desk, creating an artificial crisis that conveniently coincided with my bereavement leave.
But why?
What did she gain by delaying a major contract, potentially jeopardizing a client relationship? The answer lay in the project assignment section. The original proposal, which I had helped develop, listed me as the lead account manager with Jessica as executive oversight. However, on the return contract, there was a handwritten note from Blackwell's CEO. We were particularly impressed with Allison Parker's presentation and analysis. We request that she serve as our primary contact throughout this engagement. Jessica had been sidelined in favor of me, and rather than process the contract and acknowledge this client preference, she had created circumstances to make me appear incompetent. The manufactured crisis, the deleted files, the doctored projections, all designed to demonstrate that I couldn't handle the responsibility Blackwell wanted to give me. I sat in Jessica's chair, surrounded by evidence of her sabotage, and felt an unexpected calm replace my earlier confusion. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a $2 million client relationship being jeopardized by one person's ego and vindictiveness. I needed advice from someone I could trust. Despite the late hour, now approaching 2 a.m., I texted Taylor. Are you awake? Professional emergency. Need your counsel. Taylor, despite Jessica's claim that she was on vacation, responded almost immediately. What's happening? Are you at the office? I gave her a brief summary of the situation, asking if she could meet me early in the morning before the supposed 8 a.m. team review. She agreed without hesitation, suggesting 6:30 at the coffee shop across from our building. With that support secured, I turned back to the legitimate work of completing the accurate Blackwell projections. I worked through the night, fueled by a combination of righteous anger, grief-induced insomnia, and the half-dozen cups of coffee I'd consumed. By 5 a.m., I had completed a meticulous reconstruction of the financial models, market analysis, and presentation slides, all backed up to my personal email and a USB drive for security. I showered in the executive bathroom using the emergency toiletry kit I kept in my desk drawer, but had no choice but to put my funeral dress back on. Somehow, it seemed appropriate for what I was planning. Taylor was already waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop, concern evident in her expression as she took in my funeral attire and exhausted appearance. You haven't been home since the funeral? she asked, pushing a latte toward me. I shook my head, then methodically laid out everything I had discovered. The supposedly deleted files that were never actually lost, the deliberately sabotaged projections, the hidden contract with its delayed processing, and the client's specific request for me as their account manager. Taylor's expression shifted from concern to anger as she reviewed the photo evidence on my phone. This is beyond toxic leadership. This is potentially fireable misconduct. If I had proper documentation and witnesses, maybe, I said. But right now it's my word against hers, and she has Richard's ear. Taylor considered this. So, what's your plan? I sipped my latte, organizing my thoughts. I need to neutralize the immediate threat to the Blackwell relationship while gathering additional evidence of Jessica's pattern of behavior. I can't just accuse her without protection. The protection being? Making myself too valuable to fire, I replied. If I save the Blackwell contract while exposing Jessica's negligence in a way that protects the company's interests rather than attacking her personally, Richard and the board will have to listen. We spent the next hour developing a detailed strategy. Taylor agreed to be my witness and backup, confirming that she had never been informed about any vacation time allegedly scheduled during this critical period. We also identified other colleagues who might have experienced similar sabotage from Jessica and could potentially corroborate a pattern. There's still risk, Taylor warned. Jessica won't go down without a fight. I know, I acknowledged. But I keep thinking about what my dad would say. He always told me that bullies count on your fear and silence. They don't expect you to stand up and fight back with integrity. Taylor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your dad sounds like a wise man. I wish I could have met him. Me too, I said, throat tightening. He would have liked you. As 7:30 approached, we finalized our plan. I would send the legitimate, corrected projections to the entire executive team, including Richard, with an explanation of the situation that focused on the urgency of properly processing the contract rather than Jessica's misconduct. Taylor would arrive at the 8 a.m. meeting prepared to confirm the timeline and absence of any communication about her supposed vacation. Before leaving the coffee shop, I received an unexpected text from Melanie, coming to your office at 8 with breakfast as promised. Also, interesting connection, my firm has been advising Blackwell on their expansion. Small world. This new information added another dimension to our plan. Melanie's position at her investment banking firm gave her legitimate insight into Blackwell's financial situation that could support my projections if questioned. As I walked back to the office with Taylor, still in my funeral dress after more than 24 hours, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and clarity. Dad had taught me that integrity meant doing the right thing even when it was difficult, even when there was risk involved. Jessica had made a critical mistake in her campaign against me. She had forgotten that lesson my father instilled in me from childhood. Ready? Taylor asked as we approached the building. I nodded. No matter what happens next, I'm not surrendering my dignity again. We rode the elevator in supportive silence, both knowing that the next few hours would likely change the trajectory of my career at Meridian Solutions, for better or worse. As we stepped onto our floor, I saw that the lights were already on. Jessica had arrived early, no doubt to review the sabotage materials before the team meeting. I took a deep breath, straightened my funeral dress, and walked toward her office with the original Blackwell contract in hand. The time for submission and silence was over. Dad would be proud. Monday morning arrived with the strange clarity that sometimes follows complete exhaustion. After finally returning home Sunday afternoon, sleeping for 12 straight hours, and changing out of my funeral dress at last, I arrived at Meridian Solutions 30 minutes before the scheduled executive briefing on the Blackwell contract. I was professionally dressed, meticulously prepared, and absolutely resolved. The conference room gradually filled with the executive team, Richard Warren, our CEO, Patricia from HR, the heads of finance, operations, and creative, and several board members who had taken special interest in the Blackwell acquisition. Jessica arrived last, looking polished and confident as she distributed folders to everyone present. Before we begin, she announced, I want to acknowledge Allison's extraordinary commitment. Despite suffering a recent family loss, she worked through the weekend to reconstruct critical financial projections that were compromised in our server incident. The calculated praise made my skin crawl, but I maintained a neutral expression. Several executives offered condolences about my father, which I acknowledged with quiet thanks. Now, let's review the Blackwell opportunity, Jessica continued, directing everyone to open their folders. As you'll see in the executive summary, we're projecting first-year revenues of approximately $2.3 million with implementation costs of roughly $400,000, giving us an exceptional ROI for a new client relationship. Richard flipped through the pages, nodding approvingly. These growth projections are very optimistic. What's driving such strong performance expectations? Jessica launched into a detailed explanation of market penetration strategies and synergies with Blackwell's existing customer base. I waited, watching as several executives frowned slightly at specific figures, though none raised immediate concerns. When Jessica paused for questions, I saw my opening. I'd like to address some discrepancies in the materials that have been distributed, I said calmly, making eye contact with Richard. Jessica's smile tightened. Perhaps we should discuss any concerns privately after the meeting, Allison. Actually, this directly impacts today's discussion, I continued, pulling out my own folders and handing them to the executive assistant for distribution. The materials you're currently reviewing contain several critical errors in the financial projections that would significantly misrepresent our capabilities to the client. A murmur ran through the room as executives accepted my folders. Jessica's face flushed with anger barely concealed beneath her professional veneer. Furthermore, I continued before she could interrupt, I need to bring an urgent matter to the team's attention. The Blackwell contract was actually signed and returned to Meridian nearly 4 weeks ago, but has not yet been processed in our system. I placed the original contract on the table, turned to the signature page, with its month-old date clearly visible. I discovered this on Jessica's desk during my weekend work session. The client is expecting implementation to have already begun according to the timeline specified in this document. Richard's expression darkened as he examined the contract. Jessica, is this accurate? We've had a signed contract for 4 weeks without processing. Jessica's composure slipped momentarily before she recovered. There were some unusual clauses that needed legal review. I was waiting for their input before processing. Our legal department confirmed they received no such request, I countered, sliding forward an email I had obtained that morning from our general counsel. Additionally, the contract includes a specific client request that I serve as their primary account manager, which contradicts the staffing plan in the materials Jessica distributed today. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Jessica attempted to redirect the conversation back to the financial projections, suggesting that my emotional state following my father's death might have affected my work quality. That's when Taylor intervened, exactly as we had planned. I've reviewed both sets of projections independently, she stated. The versions Allison has provided align with our standard modeling practices and the preliminary work our team completed last month. The versions in Jessica's folders contain multiple anomalies that artificially inflate revenue expectations. Jessica's face contorted with fury. This is absurd. Taylor was on vacation and couldn't have reviewed anything. I never requested or was approved for vacation time, Taylor replied evenly. That information is incorrect. As the meeting descended into uncomfortable tension, there was a knock at the conference room door. The receptionist entered, looking apologetic for the interruption. I'm sorry, but there's a Melanie Parker here for Allison. She says she has information relevant to your Blackwell discussion. Richard looked at me questioningly. I explained, Melanie is my sister. She works for Kingston Financial, which has been advising Blackwell on their expansion plans. She may have insight that could help clarify the situation. Richard nodded permission, and moments later Melanie entered, every inch the polished investment banker in her tailored suit. She apologized for the interruption, then succinctly explained that Kingston had developed financial projections for Blackwell's 5-year growth plan, which included assumptions about their marketing investment with Meridian. The projections in this folder, she said, indicating Jessica's materials, promise results that exceed even Blackwell's most optimistic internal forecasts by approximately 27%. Their CFO would immediately question these figures as unrealistic. The revelation landed like a bomb in the conference room. Richard turned to Jessica, his expression now openly suspicious. "Jessica, can you explain these discrepancies?" Jessica's response was a masterclass in deflection. She questioned Melanie's authority to access confidential Blackwell information, suggested I had manipulated the situation out of personal animosity, and finally claimed that any errors were the result of the IT system's failure rather than deliberate action. That's when Marcus, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, unexpectedly spoke up. "This isn't the first time files have mysteriously disappeared or been altered before important presentations." All eyes turned to him as he described his own experience of sabotage 6 months earlier. His statement opened the floodgates, with 2 other team members sharing similar stories of missing files, shifted deadlines, and altered documents that had previously been attributed to technical glitches or miscommunications. Patricia from HR shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the pattern became undeniable. Richard's expression grew increasingly grim as he realized the extent of the dysfunction within one of his most profitable departments. Jessica, sensing her position weakening, attempted one final defense. "These accusations are coming from employees with performance issues who are trying to deflect responsibility for their own failures. Allison, in particular, has been increasingly unreliable due to her family situation." The comment crossed a line, and I could no longer maintain my professional detachment. "My father died 3 days ago," I said, my voice steady despite my emotion. "I came to work directly from his funeral because I was told there was a crisis that only I could resolve. I discovered that crisis was manufactured through deliberate suppression of a signed contract and sabotage of work I had previously completed." I turned to Richard directly. "I'm not here to attack Jessica personally. I'm here because a $2 million client relationship is at risk due to mismanagement, and because I believe Meridian Solutions stands for better values than what has been demonstrated here." The room fell silent. Richard studied both sets of documents for several long moments before speaking. "We'll need to adjourn this meeting while I review these materials more thoroughly. Jessica, I'd like you to wait in my office. Allison, please stay here with the executive team to address any questions about the legitimate Blackwell projections." As Jessica left the room, her face a mask of controlled fury, I felt no triumph, only profound exhaustion and relief that the truth was finally emerging. For the next 2 hours, I answered detailed questions about the Blackwell contract, the timeline of events, and my recommendations for moving forward with the client relationship. By early afternoon, word came down that Jessica had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Richard called me into his office, where Patricia from HR was already waiting with a noticeably different demeanor than her previous dismissive attitude. "First, let me express my personal condolences about your father," Richard began. "The fact that you're even here today demonstrates extraordinary commitment." I nodded my thanks, too emotionally drained for words. "We've initiated a formal investigation into the issues raised today," he continued. "Based on preliminary findings, including the delayed contract processing and evidence of file manipulation, we've placed Jessica on immediate administrative leave. The investigation will likely take several weeks to complete as we review past incidents that may be connected." Patricia slid a document across the desk. "We'd like to offer you 3 weeks of paid bereavement leave, effective immediately. You've more than earned it, and it will give us time to stabilize the department situation." I stared at the document, torn between relief at the offered respite and concern about stepping away at such a critical juncture. "What about the Blackwell contract?" "They're expecting implementation to begin immediately." Richard smiled slightly. "Actually, I've already spoken with James Blackwell. He was quite concerned to learn about the contract delay, but expressed complete confidence in you. They're willing to adjust the timeline given the circumstances, on the condition that you remain their primary contact as originally requested." It was more than I had hoped for: acknowledgement of the truth, consequences for Jessica's actions, and protection for the client relationship I had worked so hard to build. I signed the bereavement leave document, feeling some of the weight lift from my shoulders. As I prepared to leave, gathering personal items from my desk, Taylor approached with a small smile. Justice served, finally. I couldn't have done it without you, I told her. You risked your own position to back me up. She shrugged. Your dad was right about standing up to bullies. Sometimes it just takes one person with the courage to speak first. Melanie was waiting in the lobby, having returned after providing her statement to HR. Ready to go home? She asked. As we walked to her car, she said something that caught me by surprise. Dad would have been really proud today. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You protected others who had been hurt too. Tears that I had been holding back all day finally spilled over. I just wish he could have seen it. Melanie put her arm around my shoulders. I think maybe he did.